Welcome everybody, this is the Microsoft 365 Platform Community Call. It is September 13th, and this is our weekly call where we're going to cover always the latest in the Microsoft 365 platform areas, typically with 3 different demos. Now, we might actually have 2 demos or 3 demos, a bit dependent on the week and how long the demos actually are. Now, today we'll start with the latest updates and news on the Microsoft 365 platform. We will cover intentionally some of the classic slides which we always repeat, and that is highly intentional. So if you kind of feel like, oh, I don't want to listen the first 55 minutes or 10 minutes, you can join 5 or 10 minutes late, and it's completely fine as well. But we want to make sure that we cover the latest assets and where to get started for all of the new people who are joining on this course on a weekly basis. Now, after that, we'll go and update on what's the latest on the Microsoft Teams documentation. So this time, P, if I remember correctly, is going to cover that. We'll have the group photo in together mode with all of the attendees who are willing to enable the video. And then we'll have 3 different demos today. So Rabeb will start on the Microsoft Graph Postman, scripts and advanced functionality. So how do we call the graph and interesting scenarios on there. John Miller from the Microsoft Teams Toolkit is going to continue and do an updated introduction on the Microsoft Teams Toolkit. A lot of stuff has happened within the Microsoft Teams Toolkit throughout the summer, and we want to make sure that we cover the latest on that. It is the easiest way to build Microsoft Teams extensibility. And then Bob German is going to present in the last an introduction to App Camp, and maybe we should have had a bit more descriptive title on it, but App Camp is something guidance and documentation and videos for all any ISV who's looking into building solutions for Microsoft 365 or more specifically for Microsoft Teams. So Bob is going to cover all of those assets which are available for you to take advantage. Now, we do have a lot of assets available for you already. We have 2 different YouTube channels. We have the official Microsoft 365 developer YouTube channel, where we have videos from the PMs, marketing, and the cloud advocates. And then we have our Microsoft 365 community video channel, where we have the community demos, recordings. For example, this recording will be available within 24 hours in that channel. Easiest way to follow up on what's happening in both of them is to subscribe on those channels, so you will get a notification when there's new videos available. Especially on the community video channel, we do have a new video, at least one new video released every single day. So there's all the time new content related on Microsoft 365 available from these channels. We have a lot of open source assets available for you from multiple locations, but as it might be a bit difficult to find the relevant sample directly from GitHub, we do have multiple different sample galleries, and these are really designed to make it easier for you to find the relevant sample for your scenario. So if you're looking into doing specific functionality, a scenario, and get started on building something, you can use the sample galleries to find the relevant sample for you and then pull it down and expand that based rather than building from scratch. And if you're wondering that there's too many URLs to remember, luckily there's only one, which is aka.ms M365 community, from where you can find all of these assets from a one centralized location. Now, we do have quite a few community calls still ongoing. So we do have this Tuesday community call happening every single Tuesday, 8 a.m. Pacific time, and where we cover all up Microsoft 365 platform scenarios. On top of this, we have specific monthly community calls on adaptive cards, Microsoft Identity Platform, Office Add-ins, and Power Platform. And then we have a Thursday series, which happens 7 a.m. Pacific time every single Thursday. And that's either Microsoft 365 Power Platform community call or Viva Connection and SharePoint Framework community call. We're looking into consolidating this even further in the future in the level where we will have a Tuesday call and a Thursday call, and potentially a few other ones. But we're looking into making this easier for you to consume, so you always know when the calls are and what's available. Agendas for the calls are always shared in the social media 2 days or 3 days before the call, so you can actually find what's available. Now, we do have a lot of getting started assets for Microsoft 365 development. First of all, always the first thing should be that you're signing up on the Microsoft 365 developer program by using aka.ms M365 dev program. You will get a free tenant, which will renew automatically in 90 days as long as you use it for development purposes. The second awesome asset is our Microsoft Learn learning paths, which are there for free material to get started on learning how to do development in the Microsoft 365 in multiple different areas. So really, really awesome set of free material for you to take advantage. We also have two different podcasts. The Microsoft 365 Developer Podcast, hosted by Jeremy Fake and Paul Scheffelin, happening roughly in bi-weekly or monthly. There's a new episode available on that podcast. And then we have the Microsoft 365 PMP Weekly, hosted by me, Vesa Juvonen, and Waldek Mastercards from the Cloud Advocates team. And as the name kind of implies, that is a podcast which happens every single week with MVPs and the PMs as the visitors. Now, I already mentioned the samples and assets, which a lot of stuff is available. We are also working on further improving our Microsoft 365 Unified Sample Gallery at aka.ms M365 samples. We already have more than 1,100 samples available across Microsoft Teams, Power Platform, list formatting, SharePoint Framework, Office add-ins, and so on. So it is a great one centralized location where you can go and use the search criteria or filter based on the product on the relevant sample which you're interested on. That then links to the GitHub from where you can actually download the sample and get access on the source code. So really great way of finding a starting point for the implementation, what you're looking into doing. Now, we also have, as you're wondering on then potentially, as you go to the GitHub, how would I get that GitHub sample? What would I do with that GitHub sample? I don't know. This GitHub is difficult, but we luckily have you covered. And David Warner is on the call to explain what the sharing is caring is all about.
Thank you, Vesa. Well, friends, as you saw, 1,100 plus samples are available, and you wonder, how do those get there? Well, they get there by amazing contributors like yourself. But as Vesa mentioned, that landscape of GitHub can be a little confusing and troublesome. So we are here to provide you hands-on guidance. What does that mean? It means that live in a call, we're going to work together and show you and work with you exactly how to contribute, how to perform a number of these upcoming session topics. If you would like to learn more on those variety, if you want to demo on some of these community calls, but you're a little nervous, we're going to help you there too. It is all free. They are safe space, meaning that we don't record them. So you're welcome to ask any and all questions that you would like without the fear of being like, I don't know if I should ask this because it's going to get recorded. Everybody's got questions. It's okay to ask, and it's a safe space opportunity. And in fact, our Power Platform Samples contributor session is going to be live and in person at the Power Platform Conference coming up next week. The Huva app, which is the application for the conference, has just launched. So you can go, if you're an attend, add that to your agenda today. So again, there's no cost. Is absolutely free, aka.ms/sharing is caring. Vesa, back to you.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Awesome. And absolutely free. Thank you, Brad, on the chat in the call discussions. Really cool. Now, we also already mentioned the app camp. So Bob German is going to do a more detailed description and demo what the app camp is and what are the assets which are available. But this is a great asset available for starting to build your offerings for Microsoft Teams with monetization, additional capabilities, and all of that. So there's hands-on labs, videos, and all of the great asset guidance available for you to get started. But Bob is going to demo that more detailed later today. Now, on the developer news, we had 5 news which we wanted to call out. So first of all, Gary Trinder, who's a cloud advocate for Microsoft 365 development, had a really great blog post in the Microsoft 365 developer blog related on the getting started assets. So these are the links. How do I register to the Microsoft 365 developer program? Documentation, assets, community calls, all of that. Great blog post on covering those. Now, there was also a great blog post from Marita Kardaya around signed documents in a real time during Microsoft Teams meeting. And that's actually about a sample, open source sample, which is available for any partner to pull down and start building their signing application in the Microsoft 365. So really shows a scenario where you are, for example, having a discussion with somebody in a meeting app, you would then ask them to sign in a document. So really cool sample scenario. We'll probably get that one covered in some of the future calls as well. There was also updates on the Viva Learning. So Viva Learning mobile app has been updated, and there's a new functionalities available on that one, so you can learn on the go really easily. Related on Viva, there's going to be an interesting announcement on new features and announcements happening on September 22nd. So on September 22nd, Satya Nadella and I think Jared Spataro, who's the marketing director on Microsoft 365, will have this Empowering Your Workforce in Economic Uncertainty event where they're going to talk about the employee experiences and the latest on the Microsoft Viva. That's happening at 9 a.m. at September 22nd, 2022 at Eastern time. So 9 a.m. Eastern time for 45 minutes. So interesting event which is coming there. That's next week. And then just before this community call, we had a blog post published, which is listing all most used SharePoint framework solutions from the store in August 2022. So top 10 list in there. Now, before we go to the actual stars of today and the demos, we'll still have a quick update on the Teams platform documentation updates, and Surpi is on the call to cover these.
Thank you, Vesa. Hello, everyone. So I'd walk you through the Teams platform updates today. We have two new samples. First, we have online meeting subscription sample. This is a sample that demonstrates the use of online meeting subscription and sends you the notifications in a chat using a bot. And it also includes the resource data along with the notification. This sample is published at aka.ms Teams samples under the Graph meeting notification folder. Please note that this API is currently in beta. On the right-hand side, we have the second sample that shows how to toggle incoming client audio API, which allows an app to toggle the incoming audio state setting for the meeting user from mute to unmute or vice versa. The API is available through the Teams Client SDK. This sample is published at the aka.ms Teams samples under Meetings Audio States folder. Note that this feature is available in public developer preview, and you need to add the online meeting participant.toggle incoming audio.chat in your app manifest before calling this method. So these were the platform updates. If you have any feedback or suggestion, please post on aka.ms Teams platform feedback. The link is available in the footer. You could also follow us on Twitter and configure to the RSS feeds to get regular platform updates. Thank you, and over to you, Vesa.
Thank you, Surpi. Really, really cool to see the weekly updates in here. A lot of stuff and a lot of additional guidance available every single week. Now, before we go to the actual demos of today, let's do a quick group photo. We are magically actually on time, which is super, well, not rare, not surprised at all, right? But we have 50 seats in the room, and we'll grab a GIF animation out of this. I'm going to put the Camtasia recorder enabled. A few more seats, few more rows. Let's see. Where is my Camtasia? That's over there. One more row. One more. I think we have one more row still on the house. Maybe, not yet, maybe a few more. I guess it's good to start recording. Maybe we're hitting the 50. So 3, 2, 1. Let's do some hand waving, everybody. We'll grab a GIF animation out of that. Thank you for joining on the community call. Such an awesome thing to see all of you on the call and joining on a weekly basis. Thanks, everybody. Really, very cool. Awesome. And by the way, I have to say, hopefully some of you will be in the Power Platform Conference next week in Orlando. I will be there as well. So we might actually see face-to-face. Who knows? We'll see. Now, let's actually go to the real stars of today's, which is Robeb, John Miller, and Bob German. So we'll start with Robeb around a Microsoft Graph Postman scripts and what we can do over there. So showcasing the power of those Microsoft Graph APIs. And then we'll move to John and Bob after that. But Robeb, take it away.
Thank you, Vesa. Right. So my name is Robeb. Thank you for being patient with me. I am a product manager with the Microsoft Graph team. And today we will be talking about Postman and the Microsoft Graph collection on Postman. Just in case you are not familiar with what Postman is, so Postman is an API platform, a very powerful API platform that enables you to build and test APIs. It's really an amazing tool and very loved by a lot of developers because of a very rich set of features. One of those really amazing features on Postman is collections. And as the name indicates, collections are groups of API requests that are organized together into folders. One, to make your work space looks more organized, but also they are a great way to collaborate with your team members, as you can fork those collections and collaborate on them together. It's also a great way if you need to generate some APIs, documentation, and tests. So the good news for us is we do actually have a Microsoft Graph collection on Postman. So if you're using Microsoft Graph and if you love Postman, we brought Microsoft Graph to you on Postman. I forget to mention, so this is actually the third or fourth session of a series we did on Postman and Microsoft Graph. So before the summer break, in the previous sessions, we went through, what's Postman, how you can set up an Azure Active Directory application and then authenticate to be able to use the Microsoft Graph collection. We even went through how you can create your own kind of personalized, customized Postman collection using Graph Explorer, and then you can import it on Postman, how you can use the collection runner, etc. I will make sure to leave all the relevant links for you here, especially the one with the step-by-step guide. Oh, I see Fabian already did that. Thank you very much, Fabian. So that's like the guide on how to use Postman with Microsoft Graph. And today we will continue. No, we don't want to run this. Today we're going to continue with some more advanced features of Postman, particularly scripting. So scripting basically is adding some dynamic behavior to requests and collections, if you do need to add that. So that allows you to write, tests, or maybe build some requests that have dynamic params, or even passing data between requests. Now, this is particularly useful in the case of using Microsoft Graph, because the chances of you needing, a piece of information, some data from a request to another is really high. Like, you need user ID to do a lot of things with the API. Now, if I can share my browser, I can show you Postman. I am on Postman. This is my workspace, and I have the right environment here. So, and I did authenticate. So this all should work as it should. Right. So as I mentioned, sometimes you need a piece of information from one request to another. For example, let's say I am doing some sort of operations. My applications requires me to do a few things with Teams. If I look here, I see I can get all the teams that I'm part of. One thing I might be interested in is for one specific team is to maybe see the channels or even create a channel, etc. And for that, I will need to have the exact team ID that I'm interested in to do anything else. Now, to do this, the flow, the concept with Postman is fairly easy and straightforward. Passing data or dynamic params, basically, we store that as an environment variable. Just to store it as an environment variable and then use it as needed. So if you see here, for example, for me to get the channels, I will need the team ID. Go to my environment. On this environment, I have one variable that is called team ID. And then I can set the value to whichever value I need. Let's say, for example, I can see here that I do have 5 teams. And if I go, I'm going to just change the value for the sake of doing this. So if I copy this value and then set it on my variable here, make sure I'm saving. And then if I go and see the channels, it should show me the new value. As you can see here, it's a new value, and then send. I can see which channels I have in there. It's simple, it's easy, but let's face it, copy pasting manually like this is not particularly useful, especially if you are dealing with a more complex scenario. There must be a better way to do this. And that's where scripting came in handy. So these scripts are basically just pieces of JavaScript code. And if, like me, you're not a JavaScript developer, please don't be intimidated by this, because it's fairly easy. And for the most common scenarios, you need 2 lines of code. So don't worry, we can survive this JavaScript situation here altogether. And here is where all the magic happened. It's really not magic. Basically, Postman has a sandbox where all these scripts would run. Now, this is tests, and this is where we're going to put those scripts. Now, luckily for us, I did not write any of this. This came by default when I forked my Microsoft Graph collection. And as you can see here, this is like basically to guide me as a user to make sure that I am properly authenticated. This one is really useful for me, because this is in case I don't have the right permissions. It will say, no, you can't run this because you're missing some scopes. Go to your Azure Active Directory, dashboard, and add the permissions that you need. Now, to pass data, to make sure that that variable that we have on the environment is set to the exact value that we need it to, all we have to do is this. So we're going to parse the response body. Now, that requires also that we take a good look at this response body to know the exact value, what we are interested in. And then all I'm saying here is, from this response body, I want you to set the environment variable with the name team ID to the ID of the first value you get. And that's because here it says it's called value. It could be something else, and I will need to use the right value. Obviously, you get here, it's brilliant. You get autocomplete and the usual, writing code stuff, basically. So that's what I'm getting. Now, because I have this, if I run this, it should change this environment value to the first one again. So I did run this, I go in here, and then I see it did change again. So now if I'm running this, it will show me, yes, it should show me something different because it's a different team. So if I try here, it says I have 5 channels. I wonder if it's different. Yes, and for this team, I have simply 1 channel. Obviously, this is an example. You could have as many variables as you want, name them, as appropriate as you need, and use them here to pass data and to have dynamic params in here. So that's one thing I wanted to show. The other thing that I wanted to show, and again, this might be very useful in the case of the Microsoft Graph collection. Last time, if you were with us, when we showed the collection runner, which I can't show again. So if you go here, if I say run collection, as you see, this Microsoft Graph collection is a fairly big collection. So this collection here is is big to run, and it may not even make sense for you to run everything. Yes, you can manually deselect and then select the items that you're interested in, but again, this might not be the best way to do it. A great way to do it, though, is chaining. And chaining requests is making sure that you are setting what's the next request to run after a specific request. And to do that, what I need to do is Postman and set next request. And then you simply set your next request and whichever name you have here. So I could say, I'm going to create channel because that's easy. Now, few things to note about this. This is irrelevant if you're using the send here. So if you are just running this request individually, nothing would happen with this Postman set next request. This is only useful in the case of a collection. So this is a way to set the order in which you want to run multiple requests inside a collection. And basically, I think that's all I wanted to show today. I'm not sure if, hopefully I'm not over time, because last time I was over time.
Nope, you're right on time, Rabeb. So 15-minute slots, so this is all good. So thank you for showing that and showing those
Brilliant.
new things. Really cool. And we'll add on the blog post summary, of course, the references to the assets, so people can easily access that from the recording.
Yeah, and if you have any questions, please let me know on the chat and we can take that. Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabeb, on that one. Really cool. And then we'll move to John Miller and we'll do an introduction to Microsoft Teams Toolkit, which has been having a lot of updates within the past months. So it's good to actually cover what's new and how do we actually start using that and what does it actually provide.
Yep. Thanks, Vesa. Let me share my screen here.
Yep.
So thanks for having me. So as Vesa said, my name is John. I'm a program manager on the Teams Toolkit team. And I have a couple slides to share with you, just give you a little bit of an overview of the way that we look at building apps for the Teams platform. And then I'm just going to jump right in and just give an overview of the Teams Toolkit and where we're at today and show you some of the features we have in the VS Code extension. And then I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing next. And I think then we'll wrap up with that. So just real quick, I have this slide here with the Teams platform. So this is a little overview, and I think it might even be a little outdated now because there's probably a couple more bullet points we could add on here these days. So I'll need to update that. But just want to give an idea of if you're new to the platform or if you're not, a lot of this will be familiar to you. But this is kind of what we look at as how, if I'm getting started, what does it mean to extend Teams? What does it mean to build an app for Teams? What can I even do? And this is a really common question we get as people are coming into the platform or getting started with building for Teams. And I find it helpful to look at something like this and see, the categories of how we break it down on the left here with the capabilities, the UI constructs, and how you can kind of start with an entry point into that space. And there's a lot of terminology here. So there's a lot of things to search and learn about, and that all can be pretty overwhelming. So the way we're looking at it with Teams Toolkit is we're really just trying to ask one question, like, what are you trying to do in Teams? What are you trying to do? And we're focused on the outcome of what you're trying to build. And then as you go across that journey, you start to pick up some of that terminology and figure out, like, okay, what am I trying to do? I want to show, my web app inside of Teams in this area that I'm familiar with. What's that called? And maybe you learn that that's a tab, and that helps you kind of progress through the journey. Or, hey, I really want to do some type of chat type interface. Maybe that's a bot. I've heard that before, something like that. We want to try to introduce these topics kind of in an incremental way. And an outlook of, the way we think about that is we really want it to be simple to build for Teams and Office and Outlook, and also use the tools that you know and you love. And so these are kind of the 6 ways that I've kind of broken it down as want to make it simple to everything from learning to creating, setup, changing it, testing it, and then if you need it, scaling it. And so that's why we've kind of created the Teams Toolkit to try and solve these kind of 6 buckets. And so with the learn part, we have samples, we have our own documentation right now, we have tutorials that are specifically around the Teams Toolkit and how it can help you solve specific scenarios that we've focused on. It helps you create projects with templates that help jumpstart those scenarios, which I'll show you in a minute. And then helps you build them. So it sets up, a bit of a development environment for you. It can help you with things like tunneling, so you can debug these applications since everything's hosted remote when you're working with Teams. And then also, testing. And if you need it, you can also adopt our provisioning and deployment kind of pieces of the toolkit. And what that really is by default, we give you a kind of our opinion on a good way to get started to scale this with Azure. And then you can also use the toolkit to publish directly to Teams. So if you want to take this, your project, and put it in your tenant, then you also have kind of a one-click way to do that as well. More practically, another way to think about the toolkit is, what does it include? Like, what am I actually looking at here? And I think one way that helps me is to think about it like this, like, what are the practical things I'm going to be using? And so we have these 4 things. The toolkit provides a CLI tool, and the VS Code and VS extensions build on top of the CLI to give you a little bit more of UI and UX and the tools that you might be familiar with. And then we also have an SDK that provides some abstractions and some simplifications for things like single sign-on, for things like creating certain types of bots that help you achieve a certain scenario, which I'll show you in a minute. And these are kind of the 4 things that the toolkit provides right now. So I'm just going to stop sharing this and jump over to VS Code. So hopefully you can see that. And I'm going to start with just, how do you even get Teams Toolkit? If you're working in VS Code, and that's what I'm going to show today. Today I'm going to just take a tour of the VS Code extension. You just go to the marketplace, search it like I did here, and install it. So it's just like any other VS Code extension. Once you install it, you'll get a tab over here on the left-hand side. And this is your kind of UI for how to enter the toolkit and get started. You have a couple different options here. And the one I'm going to show you here is we can basically have an entry point to create a new app. And we can choose to either start from some templates, or we can start from some samples. The sample basically gives you a gallery of a little more complete apps that you might want to start from. And we'll probably dive into that in a future time. I don't have that much time to go into all the samples, but something to take a look at. But for now, I'm going to just highlight the templates that we provide that help jumpstart you and talk about kind of the scenario thing. So we call these scenario-based Teams apps here. It's called, think about it like, these are templates that are focused on an outcome. And for example, we've named these like notification bot. And really what this does is, if you are trying to bring existing data or events into Teams, into a Teams chat, like a notification, which is a common scenario that we hear a lot of businesses start with, then this would be a good template to start with. So I can basically get everything set up to have a bot that will send a chat message wherever I really want. I can kind of configure that and notify my team that something's going on. Our team has used this exact template to build a notification bot for showing the issues and work items from Azure DevOps that are assigned to us each day. So what we've basically done is we've selected notification bot. We give you 3 options on how you want to trigger that notification. You can use an HTTP trigger, either with a RESTify server or an Azure function, or you can use a timer. So what we did is we chose a timer, and we basically have this running in Azure every day, and every one of the team kind of gets a ping from this bot that says like, hey, these work items are assigned to you. And we might even filter down like, hey, this is a couple days old, don't forget about it, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of how we've played with that. So once you pick how you want to do this, you can choose what programming language you want to do and where you want to put it. That's fine, and I'll just name it something. And then VS Code will just scaffold out the project for us. I'll just keep it in the same window. So once this loads, then we have pretty simple project here. But what I think is interesting to highlight is just maybe a little bit about what we scaffold and what the layout of this is. And our documentation kind of goes into this a little more detail. But by default, the toolkit has this FX folder. This is where we store a lot of the configuration data for these kind of like all the M365 specific things and also your manifest values. So if we take a look in the templates folder and the app package, we see one thing the toolkit does is the manifest for your app. So maybe you're familiar with this or not, but all Teams apps have this JSON file, which is called the app manifest, that kind of really defines what your app is and where the endpoints are for the different extensibility points that you're kind of plugging into. And Teams Toolkit takes a kind of a template approach to this. You can see there's things like some mustache brackets here, and we templatize this app manifest for you. And that's controlled by these configs. And the reason we do that, and we'll get into it in a second, is because you can have different environments for this. It's the terminology we use for saying like, okay, when I'm running locally, it's one value. When I'm running in my test environment, it's another value. When I'm running in production, it's a different value. And that's kind of the way we handle that with the toolkit. If we jump back over to the Teams Toolkit tab, I'll just walk you through some of the features on what the toolkit helps you do. Let me close these things just to remove some noise. The first thing we have here at the top is the accounts area. So this is where you can sign in with your M365 account, and optionally, if you choose to use the provisioning and deployment things, you can sign in with an Azure subscription and choose your subscription here, and then that will allow you to provision and deploy things in the cloud. But by default, the only thing you really need to do is sign in with M365 identity, and that's where do you want to run this app. That's what this is for. So what the toolkit will do is once you sign in with this and then you hit F5 to start debugging, we'll go and automatically register this app in Teams Developer Portal for that tenant and get everything set up. So that way you can have a pretty seamless debugging experience without having to jump between different portals and configure everything and paste in IDs and all that kind of stuff. So you just sign in with your credentials for where you want this to be. And I've signed in with my M365 developer account, so that way I have kind of a sandboxed tenant to play around in. And the next thing we have is the environments thing. You don't have to use these features, but it is nice if you're able to. So because I'm using developer accounts, I have permissions to do whatever I want for these subscriptions. So the local and dev are the two things we give you by default. Local is what you would expect, I think, in that we run as much locally as possible. Like if you're trying to create some type of web app, then we will run the web server locally for you, just as you would expect. And for the bot piece, there's still some remote configurations that are done in Bot Framework and Teams Developer Portal, things like that. So that's not local. Those things have to be remote. But any piece that we can run locally, we will. And that's to make it easy for you to develop and debug and test things and iterate. And then as you want, you can create, you can name these environments whatever you want. Just hit the plus and type in a new environment. You might want like something like test or stage, and you can configure which Azure account that goes to. You can add users to it if you need to, so that way they can also run and debug inside that environment if they have permissions, etc. Down here in the development section, just some helpful kind of quick buttons here for how to do things. You can start another Teams app if you need to. But what I think is interesting to highlight is this add features piece. So I've already created an app here and I chose a notification bot, that template. But let's say now I'm ready to add a UI experience. So what I can do is I can hit add features, and we get a list here of some things I can do. You can see here I can add some of the other templates that I didn't choose before. So I can add a SSO enabled tab or just a regular tab without all the SSO features hooked up. I can also connect some data resources here, like I can add a SQL database to this and Key Vault, and the toolkit will help scaffold out the required files and connect all the dots for you, so it's a little easier to set up. We also have ways, if you want to add an API connection, we have kind of abstractions around that to help you connect to an external API and basically create some objects that will let you interact with that API. So we kind of scaffold that out for you. and a way to easily create GitHub Actions and Azure DevOps workflows for your project. So that way you can plug this into CI/CD a little easier. Like I said, the manifest file is provided in a templated way. So we have this feature here to make it a little simpler to find that file and open it. And then you can also click preview up here and choose which environment do I want to preview this for. Now I haven't run this yet, so these values don't exist. So I can't actually preview it. I have to run this first so that way the values exist. But let me jump over to another project where I've already hit F5. And the reason I'm skipping over here is because npm install takes too many minutes to demo live. So if I go to edit manifest file and I choose preview and I choose local, then it's going to open up my local config. You see these values have been replaced now. So I can see what my actual manifest file is. And it's available on disk as well. Just a quick way for you to be able to kind of jump back and forth between these environments if you do use them. We also plug in with some previewing adaptive cards. So for the notification bot that I did, we go back up here, and if I look in my bot source, we give you an adaptive card by default. And to make that a little nicer to edit and display, you can go here and you can see kind of a preview of that using the adaptive card extension. So it makes designing your notification, like what's going to be posted in a channel, a little easier. So you can design this, you can manipulate the data here on the left if you want to plug in for these variables. So that's just a nice little development feature. And then the last section of the toolkit that we have is the deployment section. This is an optional thing you can adopt. You can use a toolkit without having to use Azure. But if you are using Azure, it can be nice to be able to provision these things for different environments. So we have kind of one-click ways to provision all these resources that would be needed. And the way that is configured is when you scaffold, we give you some, let's see in here, there's some different options you can see here. We give you these bicep files. So we have an opinionated hosting solution for each template. So for like the bot, we put that in an app service. For any web UI front-end piece, like a tab or something like that, you can choose, but I think by default we give you an app service, so you can also choose for bots for like Azure Function, stuff like that. And so we create the bicep files to handle all that. And then when you use the provisioning features, that's kind of what controls that. So you could go and edit or reauthor those bicep files if you wanted to, or put them in a CI/CD pipeline of some kind and use the TeamsFX CLI tool to do that. But we give you a way to provision them and then deploy them as well. So the provision will create the resources, and then deploy is about getting your actual code to those resources. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. We also have another feature where you can just zip your Teams app package, and that just gives you the local bundle, which is a zip file with your app manifest for whichever environment that you want, and then you could upload it to Teams Developer Portal or whatever other way that maybe you're familiar with, or you find in documentation, and maybe that's simpler for you. And then we also have a way for you to publish directly to your organization from the toolkit. So if you are working, maybe you're working in a small team and it just makes sense to do all this right from VS Code, then you have kind of a end-to-end way to do this. Pretty easy. And I forgot about I guess this is the last section is the help and feedback area. So we have a link to a documentation and tutorials, and you can also report issues on GitHub. So let me jump back over. And I think I have just one more slide to share. So just to get started, the TeamsFX project is what we call the whole thing, because TeamsFX includes the Teams Toolkit, which is our extensions, our CLI, our SDK, also our documentation samples. So we're open source on GitHub, so you can start there. And we have the wiki has a lot of the documentation or links to the Microsoft docs, where we have a lot of content as well, has the samples, has where to get started with download and install. And you can also submit issues there, start a discussion if you have a problem or you have a question. Happy to help. So that'd be a great place to get started. I think that's what I got for you today. So thanks for listening.
Excellent, John. Thank you, John. Really, really cool stuff. And it is such a beautifully done extension for Visual Studio Code. So awesome job on that. Really, really great stuff. Good. Let's then move to Bob German and talk about the introduction on AppCamp and what's that all about.
What is that all about?
Well, what is that, Bob? What is that? Help us.
Thanks very much. So that was a great couple of demos. Tough act to follow, actually. So I have been working with my team over the summer on something called AppCamp, and I just put the URL into the chat. And so I want to kind of show you what that is today very quickly. You may know that there's a bunch of ways to extend Microsoft Teams. You can buy apps in the store. You can use low-code tools like Power Platform. You can use the Teams app templates, which are kind of pre-written apps. Or you can go for custom development, and there's a few major approaches to that. Teams Toolkit, obviously. Yo Teams is a community-based part of the ecosystem that also does some generating of a new app. But what I found, and AppCamp was really written for people who want to sell their app in the store. What I found from a lot of interviews with ISVs and our partners is that they already had an app. And as easy as Teams Toolkit makes it to start an app, they wanted to migrate an app. And so that's really what AppCamp is all about. And, there's a number of reasons you may or may not realize that you can sell your apps and actually make money in the Teams App Store now. And so here's some reasons. I'm not going to read the slide to you, but there's a lot of good business reason to do this. And really, we only charge 3% for the transaction fee, which compared to the industry standard of 20% means that you get to keep 97% of what you earn by selling your app in the store. Now, John alluded to this earlier. Microsoft Teams apps do not run in Teams. They run somewhere else, and they appear in Teams through the courtesy of this app manifest that he kindly showed a few minutes ago. These apps work the same way, whether they're created with Teams Toolkit or something else. They're hosted somewhere, and Teams is going to cleverly stitch them together. And Teams Toolkit would certainly make it faster if you're starting from, ground zero and with a greenfield app, but you don't have to. And this kind of approach really makes it easier, I think, to reuse things. So if you have an existing web-based application, maybe that web pages can appear in tabs or even dialogues or other places in the UI. If you have an Azure-based bot or even just a web service that you might want to wrap in a bot service, then you can actually start to build things like bots and messaging extensions for Teams and adaptive cards. So I'm going to kind of skip through some of these slides, but just the idea that Teams was originally architected to leverage what you've already built. And that's really where Teams AppCamp comes in. So Teams AppCamp is a virtual experience, virtual workshop. It's on demand. You can do it at your own pace. And at the beginning, you're given an app that works. It's a really simple app written in vanilla JavaScript with no particular JavaScript framework. So if you know JavaScript, if you know the basics of web development, or maybe you're advanced in web development, the idea is that you don't have to know about Microsoft 365 or React or Angular or any particular tool du jour. You can actually learn from this. And as you migrate the starting app to be a Teams app, you can hopefully apply those same principles to any app and try to migrate that. So let me just flip over to the AppCamp webpage now, which you can certainly go to. And what you'll see is that we've tried to address the full needs that somebody would have if they were going to undertake this sort of journey. So yes, there's a welcome video, but then we've got several videos that are business oriented that you can show to business leaders, product managers, decision makers to talk about why would you want to build a Teams app? What's the advantage of it? What's the advantage of it to your customers? And what's the advantage of it to your own business? And then from there, we get into some technical briefings. So these videos are sort of like the lecture part of a workshop, if there was. Yeah, don't do development in production. So true. One of my little mantras. And then the same thing for commercial marketplace. So it turns out that commercial marketplace, the way that you sell things through Microsoft's e-commerce engine, it's used already in AppSource. It's used already in the Azure Marketplace. Now it's available in the Teams App Store. So it's another whole thing to learn about. And that's why we have videos specifically on that. And there's actually another whole workshop called Mastering the Marketplace, if you want to go deeper into that. That was sort of a parallel project that my colleagues over in Commercial Marketplace put together. So then you get to do the hands-on part, and every lab has a video that explains and kind of walks you through the steps of that lab and also explains a little bit deeper. So you start off with one of these two paths, and what that does is it gets you to what we're calling the core Teams application. It's not really it's not an official term, but it's the app that's just a single tab with single sign-on and the Teams look and feel. And then from there, you can build configurable tabs, meeting app, messaging extensions, deep linking, dialogues, and there's a monetization lab. So let me get away from the slides and show you how it actually works. So I'm going to start with the sample app, and this is the standalone app, okay? And the idea here is that actually let me pop out. I don't want to show this one. So what I'm going to be doing here is sort of bouncing around and showing you all these different labs kind of on the fly. All right, so let me go back to this. So if I come here and refresh, what you'll see is a very simple app, and this is the one with the bespoke login. So recall that these two startup apps, one of them is if you're starting with an app that already has Azure AD in it. And if you want to just be free of any tooling constraints and try this without a starting app, I would recommend starting with the A path because it's obviously shorter, right? You get to have an app faster. What I want to show you now, though, because I think it's a little more interesting, is the B path, where you're starting with something other than Azure AD. And here that other is a simple, very simple cookie-based authentication. It's not really secure, but it has all the components that you would have in a real-world situation. So just as if it wasn't insecure enough, we put all the usernames here, and the password is ignored. But now I'm logged in, and if I take a look at my console, you can see we're actually validating each request. So if I try to run this inside of Teams, let's see what happens if I come over here to Teams, and it might still be logged in from before. I'm not sure. Yeah. So I'm going to get this message. You can't run this app in an iframe because most auth systems won't allow you to run in an iframe. So in the next lab, you'll solve that with a pop-up window. And so if I come, I'm not going to be needing this one anymore. Although I will say that you should always, after each lab, the original app should continue to work. So part of the idea is you're migrating your app to Teams without breaking it, because this is the real world, right? ISVs got their existing customers already. So what this does is it just says, look, you can't run it in an iframe, fine. We'll run it in a Teams pop-up window. And that works and kind of gets us past that, but it's still a pain in the neck because users are going to have to log in an extra time, and admins are going to have to keep track of multiple user accounts, et cetera, et cetera. So in the third lab in this path, you're going to actually build it with Azure AD single sign-on. And so if I start that one up and I refresh, you'll see that the login page is going to change a little bit. And what it's going to do is it's going to say, hey, log in using the old login ID to link it to your Teams login. So it's actually already logged me in with single sign-on to Teams. And now if I pick a user here and log in, it's going to connect my account with this user's account so that no matter how many times I come and go from this, in fact, we can actually peek in here and see that what it's actually done. This is all based on the Northwind database, which you'll actually download. It's actually set up a little JSON database that we're using. It's actually set up a mapping from your Azure AD over to the bespoke login system, right? So that's kind of gets you to the core app. And then from there, there's a ton of interesting things you can do. And so what I'm going to do is sort of go over to the extended labs, and this folder right here has all the labs completed. But you can do them in any order you want, sort of one at a time. One of them, well, first of all, it adds the Teams, sort of the Teams styles and look and feel. So you can see it's actually changed a bit. But I can also come in here to a channel. Suppose we're in a Teams channel and we're working on the beverages department at Northwind. And every time I want to view the beverages, I have to go back to this app, click here, then go to products, then go to beverages, and I can see the beverages. It's kind of a lot of clicking, and it sort of undermines the value of putting your app into Teams. So wouldn't it be better if, and one of the labs will guide you through this, if I could just add that tab directly to the team, select the information once, navigate to that information once, and then from then on, anytime anybody's in that team, bang, there's the information they want, and they can kind of come in and start navigating, right? So you'll learn how to do that. You'll learn how to do this also. There's another lab that builds on this, in which you build a Teams meeting app. There's another lab in which you build a messaging extension. Let me just sort of close by saying that you will also learn how to monetize your app in these labs. And we're out of time, so I'll leave it at that. But I will encourage you all to check out AppCamp, aka.ms/AppCamp. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Bob. Really, really cool stuff, and such a great set of tutorials and step-by-step guided tutorials on getting started on these things. But thank you, Rabeb. Thank you, John. Thank you, Bob. Really, really cool demos today. We'll get the recording available in the YouTube channel within 24 hours. You cannot, as an attendee on this call, download that directly from the chat, so please do not try, or you can request permissions, but that does not work. So that's exactly the reason why it's available in 24 hours in the YouTube channel. Follow us on Microsoft 365 Dev or M365 BMP to get notified whenever there's a new material and assets available on the Microsoft 365 platform. The next Microsoft 365 platform call happens on September 20th, so a week from now, 8 a.m. Pacific time. And of course, we do have a lot of those other calls as well. Check them out from aka.ms M365 calls. But that's it for today. Thank you one more time, Robert, John, and Bob. Really awesome stuff. And please keep the feedback coming. And thank you, everybody, for joining. Cheers. Bye-bye.